Good afternoon, everyone. Call to order this Thompson-Nicola Regional District Board meeting for Thursday, the 26th of October, 2023. Welcome to the meeting. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district. And today we are located on the Tk'emlúps-te-Secwépemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwépemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tk'emlúps-te-Secwépemc and respects the territory and land on which we gather today. A friendly reminder that in case of emergency, the meeting will be temporarily adjourned and we shall exit through the double doors to my left or the doors at the back leading to the back stairwell. The muster point, as you should all remember from our committee of the whole meeting 2 weeks ago, is in the parking lot at the northeast corner of 5th Avenue and Seymour Street behind the Paramount Theatre. Please, when you recross to come back to the building, use the designated crosswalks and do not jaywalk. CAO Hildebrand.
You wouldn't have got caught unless we followed you.
The TNRL is a grateful recipient of free robots for children's education from Science World's Tech Up program. The robots will debut at the Clearwater Library's Halloween Spooktacular on Saturday, October 28th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. The robots will be on hand for local K to 4 classes to visit and experience this unique hands-on learning opportunity. After the introduction at Clearwater, the robot kits will begin touring other TNRL libraries for children's programming. The TNRL is pleased to support the wonder and curiosity of local children, and I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. Just getting that in there before they get to Ashcroft. We have Director Middleton absent from today's meeting, and we have alternate Director Beppel here in her stead. Director Denise O'Connor is unable to be here, and her alternate is at a meeting along with her in Lytton today. Upcoming meetings and events: Wednesday, November 8th at 10 a.m. we have a committee of the whole meeting. Thursday, November 9th at 10:30 a.m. we have the inaugural hospital board meeting. And on Thursday, November 9th at 1:30 p.m. we have the inaugural regular board of directors meeting. Today in your blue folders, you will find a letter from the Honorable Bruce Ralston, Minister of Forests, to recap the conversation and commitments made during the 2023 UBCM meetings in September, and regular mail. We move to additions to or deletions from the agenda. We have an additional reason to go into closed meeting, and that's under section 91C of the Community Charter, Labor and Staff Relations. So could I have a motion, please, to adopt the agenda as amended? Thank you. Director Stamer, Director Blackwell seconds. Are there any further additions to, deletions from? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any, carried. We have the regular board meeting minutes of October 12th, 2023. Director Sarai, thank you. Director Hall seconds. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, opposed, carried. We move on to delegation. We have Ryan Deneau, CEO of Healing Between Worlds, who is going to be presenting to us. Mr. Deneau, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think my last name was Deneau about 8 or 9 generations ago, much further east from here. It's now Denault. My name is Ryan Denault. I'm a fourth generation British settler here in the interior of British Columbia and a Skeetcheston band member just outside of Kamloops. I wanted to introduce myself to you guys today. I've some familiar faces here. Really happy to see the people that I recognize in this room, and there's some new faces that I wanted to introduce myself, talk a little bit about my history in this community, and a new venture that I have taken on this past June called Healing Between Worlds. So I'm going to start with giving you a little bit of a rundown of myself. Do we have, there we go, thank you. How are we doing there? Okay. So a little bit about myself. My grandfather on my Indigenous side was a Skitcheston band member. My grandmother was a Tecumseh equipment member. My grandfather and grandmother on the British side both settled in Salmon Arm and then moved into the Kamloops area and opened what was called Shamrock Meats years and years and years ago. They used to purchase cattle from my grandfather on the Indigenous side out at Skitcheston. He had a ranch out there. And so my family's met well before my mom and my dad ever met, which is kind of an interesting part of my heritage. My father, Wally Denault, was a hockey player in town, but also an advocate for this community, both sides of the river. He did so much work working with Indigenous people, a lot of work at the Scalep School later on in his life. My mother, Helen Askew, has a lineage of Askew Foods. If you know any of the foods in the food stores in the interior, that's a part of my family as well. She was a national figure skater. That's how the two of them met, was actually on Mac Island. The first time my dad saw my mom figure skating, he looked at his buddy and said, "I'm going to marry that woman." And sure enough, if any of you knew Wally, he was pretty determined when he had his mindset on things. So that's how we started with my family. One of the unfortunate parts about that time was that my grandmother was very, very helpful in community through the back door of the meat market. They used to feed, the less fortunate, some Indigenous people, a lot of Japanese people that had come through for the railroad. So my mom never really saw race when she grew up until she wanted to marry my dad. And unfortunately, my grandmother really had a strong opposition to that. In fact, during the wedding, stood up and got very proper and walked out of the room. And then when she was pregnant with me, had actually sat my mom down and said, you can't bring a half-breed into this world. He's going to struggle mightily if you do that. Of course, I'm very thankful that my mom did not take that advice. So I came into the world. But to be honest with you, my grandmother wasn't all wrong. Through growing up, I definitely had a lot of struggles around race. I'm half Indigenous, half British, but I definitely take on the Indigenous traits. And so I had a lot of people give me a lot of racial tension when I was growing up, and I didn't really understand it because I grew up off the reserve. I am a success story of the Indian Act. I'm assimilated. And so I grew up not knowing my culture. I didn't understand smudging, didn't understand sweat lodge, didn't understand any of these things around that side of my heritage. But I was receiving all the racial tension of that. What was really interesting was that when I was on the reserve, I was considered white. When I was off the reserve, I was considered an Indian. And that left me in a place where I really didn't understand who I was. And I chameleoned a lot when I was a teenager and an early adult, just to fit in with whatever was going on. That led me down the road of wanting to numb that pain. And I started doing that at the age of 13, and I got really good at it by the age of 17. Did a lot of drinking through those early years, and then I started to find other substances and continued on with that as a functioning addict for the duration of my adult life up until 2020. In 2020, I still to this day can't tell you what happened exactly, but something outside of myself decided to pick me up out of that space and place me on this new path. And through part of that healing process, I started to recognize that as I shared with people around me and became vulnerable about what I was going through, I started to receive, people started to share, and I started to create this safe space for people to start talking about the things that were going on with them and some of the struggles that they were having. And so I started to be asked to speak publicly about some of the different things that I'd gone through in my addiction and some of the ways that I interacted with the world. And so we're having some fun times here. Sorry, guys, we're going in the wrong direction. And so as I started to share with people and started to create this safe space, I actually had a person that many of you may know in this room, Elise Laird, come up to me from Amplify Consulting and said, you know, I hear you speaking publicly. What are you going to do with all of this? And I kind of laughed it off and I said, what are you talking about? And she's like, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, when you're speaking, you're having an effect on the people that are around you. What are you doing with that? And I said, you know, honestly, right now, I'm not doing anything with it. I'm like a feather in the wind. If people ask me to speak about it, I'll speak about it, but that's about it. At the time I was working for the United Way, and I was working in Lytton and Merritt, working with those communities along with all the Indigenous communities around, and I was supporting fire and flood victims. I was very happy in what I was doing. And she said, yeah, but you're still speaking publicly. What, you know, where are people landing when they look you up? Everybody's got a supercomputer on the end of their hand. And I said, well, they're not ending up anywhere. And that was the beginning of Healing Between Worlds. She convinced me at my favorite gym, Moccasin Square Gardens. If anybody knows the gym over there, that was the beginning of thinking about what we would do with this. And so Healing Between Worlds is my vision around that is to nurture healing, connection, and understanding between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada. Am I going the wrong way again? Wow, I need an assistant. And my mission is to provide resources, education, and support for individuals, groups, and communities to bridge Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultures in Canada. Through empowerment and inspiration, all people can embark on their own journey to create a more just and equitable world. Oh, I'm going the right way now. So there's three different pillars of work that I do. The first one is talking about the history of Canada through an Indigenous lens. And then once my clients have that baseline of understanding, then we start to have conversations around the 94 calls to action and the 47 articles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And one of the things I talk about immediately when we talk about those things is that we don't actually have the answers to how that is going to be implemented in our country. We are at the early stages of having an understanding of how we move forward in a respectful way on both sides of the river, both sides of our communities, both sides of our province, and both sides of our country. And so I'm very, very happy to be doing that work and to be working with individuals that are opening their ears and opening their eyes to those new opportunities. I also do keynote speaking around my family, my Indigenous family's avoidance of the residential school system. I'm third generation removed from the residential school system. And so we do some conversation around that. And I obviously also talk about my lifelong struggle with functioning addiction and how I healed. And then the third piece that I work on, and this is really where my heart lies, obviously, with my history. I work with people that are struggling with addiction, and I do that one-on-one and in group settings with people. I work with people that were like me, functioning addicts. I'll go to their home for people that don't want to be in group settings or don't want people necessarily to know that they're struggling. And then I also work at some of our transition houses. So Genesis Place on Fortune Drive. I go there Tuesday evenings and work with 5 or 6 people per week to work with them on helping them find a better life. I'm very, very happy to report that yesterday was the first time that somebody that I was working with went from a transition house to moving out and living on their own. This gentleman's 52 years old, and he's never lived on his own before. And he's starting that journey yesterday. Gives me shivers just to talk about it. And so what can Healing Between Worlds offer the TNRD and this regional area that I care so much about? I've talked about it a bit before, but we'll go over it again. You know, understanding the history of where we come from. I think that when we live in a place that has the Kamloops Residential School, that it's in all of us to learn about the history of what happened here on the other side of the river, learn about, you know, what that reality was. And for a lot of us in this room and a lot of us in this community, we didn't have an understanding of it. I remember growing up and seeing that brick building and not really understanding what that meant and what happened to those children that were over there. It just was not taught to us, and I'm included in that. And so I do a lot of talking as I gain knowledge about that history. I do a lot of talking about that. And then again, Truth and Reconciliation, United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. What does that mean for us moving forward? And then capacity building strategies and expectations. You know, when we're engaging with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, they are being placed in a position now of being involved in a lot of different things that they don't necessarily have the capacity to help us with. And so strategizing on how we can assist in gaining some understanding from their voices is critical. Negotiating and mitigating supports and with companies and contractors. I do a lot of work. I spent about 15 years in the mining industry, and I still work with Indigenous groups, mining companies, provincial and federal governments around mitigation strategies and contract negotiation. And then working with Indigenous groups on relationship building and a path for doing that in a good way. Like I said, the keynote speaking on the one-on-one and group peer addiction coaching is also stuff that I absolutely love doing. And so far since June of this year, I've had the privilege of working with places like Interior Health, Camas Chamber of Commerce, Community Futures, Hoiston, Bridge River Indian Band, Calgary Board of Education, SMS Equipment, Amplify Consulting, the Reach Group, and the Camas Film Society. What's been really interesting about this is I've not only been able to talk to people about the history of Canada, but I was actually asked to go to Hoiston and talk to their elders and their residential school survivors, and just facilitate time for them to sit down and talk about some of the things that they had gone through. They had anticipated getting about a half a dozen to a dozen elders there, and I walked into the gymnasium and they had 60 elders waiting for me. That's the closest I've gotten to not being sure about how I was going to move forward in a speech. You know, having them sit there, but I just went with telling my story, and it opened up this beautiful conversation I got to have with a bunch of the elders out there. So one thing I want to leave you guys with is that, you know, I don't believe it's an us against them. I believe we're all in this together, and I believe that we heal when we walk together. I really want to thank you guys for giving me a couple minutes to speak to you. And if you guys have any questions or any comments, I would look forward to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denault, for your presentation today. Very interesting. And does anyone have any questions? Director Hamer Jackson?
Yeah, good on you. I just thought you might want to know your dad. I knew him, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago, and you were probably really young at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also a avid fastball player. He was very respected, competitive player, and he was just a great guy. So good on you, man. Keep it up.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying he was competitive. I wouldn't say he was the nicest when he was playing sports. Yeah, I learned a lot from him in that realm. I'm a really nice guy until you get around the boards or around the pitch. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
I did play against him.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director Hamer Jackson. Anyone else with any questions or comments? Alternate Director Beppel?
Thank you, Mr. Denault. One of the things that local government does with First Nations is have community-to-community meetings to build relationships and understanding and talk about joint ventures and things like that. So I'm just wondering if you've ever had the opportunity to do any work in terms of a community-to-community meeting between a local government and a First Nation.
So I haven't had a lot of experience at the municipal level, but I have at the provincial and federal level, working with communities, industry partners, and then provincial and federal governments, and navigating, mediating those conversations. I think what's really interesting about those interactions are that everybody's speaking English, but they tend to be speaking different languages. And sometimes we, unfortunately, without our knowledge, offend each other. And so I've spent the last 15 years developing different ways to communicate with each other in respectful ways and coming from places of understanding so that we can get to the root of what's actually trying to be negotiated or talked about in that room rather than accidentally offending people. So yeah, I've got 15 years of experience, just not municipal level, but I'm pretty sure I could adapt quickly. Thank you.
Director Houghton?
Is more of a comment than anything. He's got that same deep voice as Rick Denault.
Oh, that's my uncle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I worked with him a lot of years over on the reserve when I worked at John Deere. He looked after the maintenance for KIB and then he ventured on out to Skeeterson and great presentation. Say hi to Terry Denault. I went to school with Terry.
Oh, right on. Yes, I will for sure. Thank you.
You know, it just goes to prove we really are all in this together, aren't
We
we?
sure are. Yeah. And
Is
it's
it-
Kamloops, so you find out about who knows who and the families and all that great stuff. I love it.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Denault has his contact information on the screen. If anyone wants to contact him afterwards, Director Getz.
And if you guys are okay with it, I'll come around with some business cards. If
Sure.
that's all right. Okay. Great.
So just my question is right now in Merritt, we're working on a MOU with 5 bands. But we also have another band, Cooks Ferry, that is there on land swap. We've made some commitments in the community to start renaming our streets with First Nations names, as well as I call myself a colonial. Every time I go to these things, I'm a colonial, and I was born in 58. I grew up in a little place called Langenburg, Saskatchewan, and back then First Nations people were not allowed in the city. It was against the law for them to come in. It was against the law for their kids to come to school with us. It was hard for us to understand that as kids. And as we grew up, it was still hard to accept. So it's a lot of work. We've had several meetings with the 5 bands, and the 5 bands have a hard time agreeing with each other, let alone us, but we're getting there. I would appreciate your card because I may need to tap you on the shoulder for that when we start getting into certain things. We've met with the ministry to help us through that as well, Aboriginal Affairs to help us with that as well. So we're hitting all the things, and we're also, when we change our Welcome to Merritt signs, all the languages of the 5 bands will be on there as well. And our city hall and civic center now have the welcoming language of everybody on the door as well. So you're right, we're in this together, but it's kind of funny with your name. I was a miner, I worked for GS Ridpath for a number of years, and I would work in Ontario, and I get on a plane in Vancouver with a guy named Guy Mallet. But by the time we got to Ontario, he was Guy Mallet. And then as we came back, it was Guy Mallet again. So it does change. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I had a whole year where I got sent to the principal's office because during roll call, I wouldn't answer to Monsieur Denault. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for your presentation, Mr. Denault.
Thank you so much, you guys. Appreciate it.
We move on to item 6.2, building infraction expired permit. Is there anyone here to make representation regarding this property? No? All right, there's no one here, so we move on to 6.3, building infraction stop work order electoral area J. Is there anyone here to make representations regarding this property? Seeing no one. Move along to unfinished business 7.1, building infraction expired permit electoral area P. We do have a report and we do have a recommendation. Director Ranta, thank you. Director Morris seconds. Any questions or comments? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor, opposed if any, that is carried. Item 7.2, building infraction stop work order electoral area J, another report, another recommendation.
So moved.
Director Stamer, thank you. Seconded by Director Thorpe. Any questions or comments? No, seeing none on the question. All those in favor, opposed if any, that is carried. Item 8.1.1 CAO verbal report, CAO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden, and good afternoon, Board of Directors. I just have 4 real high-level updates for the board today. First, the regional newsletter. The regional newsletter project is now in progress, and the Communications Department is expecting this newsletter to arrive in the mailboxes of our electoral area addresses in mid-November. As mentioned in my late August CAO report, the regional newsletter project started in fall of 2022. And Communications makes unique newsletters for all 10 electoral areas across the region. Many of the contents are relevant to the entire TNRD, but there is an area specific contents for each of these newsletters. So it is unique to each electoral area. The project is happening again, but it's slightly delayed because of our unfortunate EOC season, but it'll be out here shortly. The next topic was just a quick update on budget engagement. Communications is also in the process of now drafting budget engagement materials to help people understand how they are affected by our annual budget at the TNRD. Last year, we developed a lot of information for our budget highlights webpage. We also included a large section on the budget process in our spring 2023 regional newsletter, and we put out news releases each year when the budget is approved to provide budget information to the public. Our communications team and finance teams are working closely to make this information more visually appealing and easier to consume by the public. The communications department will be able to display this information in the coming weeks as we get into our first upcoming budget meeting here mid-November. My third topic is around accessibility. Staff took part in another excellent meeting of our Accessibility Advisory Committee on September 26th. The committee has 11 members with a diverse backgrounds and experiences. It also includes Directors Blackwell and Hayward leading that committee. They all have been providing input to staff on accessibility of TNRD facilities and our digital platforms. Staff have now been tasked with drafting an accessibility plan to bring to the committee, and staff will be carrying out an audit of accessibility on all of our public facilities. So these would include libraries, parks, eco depots, and transfer stations, community halls, cemeteries, and even this building, the civic building here in Kamloops. We are creating checklists to assess each building, and this will give us a full understanding and picture of where we're succeeding in accessibility and where we're not. And this will help us with plans moving forward. And then finally, I just wanted to provide a short Premier's Task Force update. The task force had its first initial meeting last week, and it was great to get things started. We were able to make introductions, get to know the other participants. In addition to the 14 members, a significant support team was also involved, which was great for me to see. We have confirmed our meetings through February 2024, and the work has just started to begin. As I've communicated to the board, a few of the meetings for the task force conflict with our board meetings, and Mr. Jamie Vieira will be acting in my place for 2 of the next 4 meetings. And I know we'll do a great job, and I will still be behind the scenes working with the agendas and staff to ensure they run smoothly. The task force has agreed that communication and updates from our work will be coordinated and aligned to ensure we're getting a consistent message out to the province. One key point and observation from the task force that I wanted to share with the board is that there's a significant engagement process that is happening that maybe wasn't communicated at the beginning. There's going to be a ton of work behind the scenes. There's invites that are already being sent out through the next number of months, and it's going to involve community groups, partners, industry, which is critically important. Some of the information I heard from my board. So I'm looking forward to representing the TNRD and many other areas. I've been getting dozens and dozens of emails and calls from all sorts of people that are engaged and connected with our unfortunate emergencies of late and are sharing good information that I'm compiling and then bringing forward to the task force. So I will, as I can, provide updates to the board. If there's any questions about any of those 4 topics, I'd gladly take them.
Thank you, CAO Hildebrand. Does anyone have any questions or comments for the CAO? All right, Director Sow, Director Houghton.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hildebrand, I was just wondering in terms of resources in relation to the task force, is the province providing any supports financially for your time? Just out of curiosity.
No, actually, thank you through the chair to Director Sow. This is a volunteer basis, but I am really happy to see how it's being managed and scheduled. In fact, the next meeting is in person here in Kamloops. So that'll work well for me with the inaugural meeting coming up on November 9th. So.
Thank you, Director Houghton.
No, thank you, CEO Hildebrand. I noticed, and we talked briefly earlier on about this. I see Mary McGregor reached out to you and wants to do some consultation with you, along with Kevin Boone from BC Cattlemen's. I think that'd be a good resource on the ag side and the local side. Mary was involved in the fire this year at her place at Knutsford. So you got some good working people there to help you on the ag side.
Thank you for that comment. I received that email today and I will reach out and do my best to meet with them in person. But if there's anybody that want to communicate with me, it's best to send me an email with the key messages because I'm getting so many requests. It's just hard to keep track. And absolutely. So I would gladly take those messages forward. So please can communicate that directly to me.
Thank you. Alternate Director Beppel.
Thanks, through to Mr. Hildebrandt. In terms of some of the agencies that you want to contact, because you've said a lot of people are contacting you, but what are some of the agencies or groups or individuals that you feel are important to connect with, say within the TNRD as an example?
Thank you for the question. To Alternate Director Beppel, I know that there is a significant amount of reach out that's happened through the task force, and all of our work through the EOC. We've talked in agriculture, industry. There's many people in this room that I've gotten some very direct information from, and I'm proud to be able to take that forward. But I can tell you in the list that I've seen lately, it's a wide variety of groups that I think is well covered throughout the province.
Thank you. Any other questions for the CAO? No, we move along to item 8.1.2. Whistleblower policy. We do have a recommendation. Director Bass, thank you. Second by Director Ranta. Any questions or comments regarding this? Alternate Director Beppel?
Thank you. In the policy under the section called general, it starts with the words persons who in good faith. When I read through the document, persons didn't seem to be defined. I assumed that persons would be employees of the TNRD or contractors, but it wasn't specific. So is that going to be defined at some point? Through to Mr. Hildebrandt.
Hi, Director Beppel through the chair. The reference to persons under that general section refers to applicable persons under the section application on page 1. That part remained unchanged from our original policy. We could amend it slightly to say applicable persons from application or something like that for further clarity at the direction of the board. So it's TNRD employees, consultants, vendors, contractors, officers, elected officials, and any other parties doing business or volunteering with the TNRD.
Does that answer your question, Alternate Director Beppel? Or does that provide a solution?
I guess it's, I'm not a lawyer, but I think it would have been had more clarity if the term persons was defined within the list of definitions, but if staff thinks it's clear enough, that's fine.
CAO Hildebrandt?
Through you, Chair Roden, we can certainly add that language in if that's what the board wishes.
Corporate Officer Lois, does that require a motion on the part of the board?
Thank you, Chair. The policy that's currently before you has proposed wording in it. So if you were going to alter the wording in the policy, then as Mr. Hildebrandt says, that can of course be done, but we would need to know what wording it was that you wanted replaced in there. So essentially the meaning of the word persons in this case.
Thank you, Director Getz.
I'm fine with the way it stands. I think persons is the probably safest word to use. It encompasses everyone, no matter how you identify. I think if we start to pull this apart, it's just going to get stickier. So I'm happy with leaving it as persons. I don't think we need to change on that.
Thank you. So if someone wishes to have it changed, we would need a motion to that effect. In the absence of a motion to that effect, then it will remain as it is presented to us. All right, anyone else have any questions or comments? We do have the recommendation on the floor, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 8.1.3 Canada Community Building Fund, the fund formerly known as gas tax. We have Smith Pioneer Park, and we do have a recommendation. Director Laird, Director Ranta seconds that. Thank you. Any discussion? Questions, comments? We need to go on a tour of Smith Pioneer Park one day.
It's a nice park.
Any questions or comments regarding this? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 8.1.4 Contract for Household Hazardous Waste Receiving Facility. We do have a report here from the General Manager of Operations. We do have a recommendation, and please note that this is a weighted vote.
So move.
Director Stamer, thank you. Second by Director Laird. Are there any questions for Mr. Vieira? Any questions or comments? Director Laird.
I was just concerned that we only had one person that actually wanted to do the job. I was just wondering if Jamie could explain why that were more people bidding on the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Laird, through the chair. I can't answer that question. I could speculate and give a little bit of background. This is actually the second time we went out for procurement for these services. It is a very specialized, service that they're providing, because we're looking for them to actually provide the facility and the service to the public. So after we were unsuccessful the first time, we tweaked it and understood there was some proponents out there who would bid the second time. But that's my long way of answer, saying I don't know why, but it's a specialized service. So that's probably the reason.
Thank you. I have Director Ranta and then Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, I see it's going to cost roughly 200,000 annually to provide this service. And we previously used to have one or possibly two events, either here in Kamloops or at a outlying community. What's the difference in cost between those two events and the 200,000 that we're spending now?
Thank you, Director Anta. Through the chair, approximately $100,000 more for having the year-round facility. So prior to this contract, we were budgeting $100,000 per year just to run 2 to 3 single-day events.
Thank you.
Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. Similar question. I understood it was $75,000 that you were budgeting each year for those 2 to 3 single day events per year. So I'm just wondering, in light of the fact that we only had one bidder and that bidder was for $1 million, would it be your opinion that we could continue to run 2 to 3 day events, $375,000 to $400,000 instead of the $1 million? Is there an impediment to us doing this the way we're doing it as compared to this? I get the point that it's open year round, but could you comment on whether we would be better off given the money to do more 2 to 3 day events?
Thanks for that. So through the chair, I guess this goes back to our regional solid waste management planning process. So I identified as part of that whole public consultation, the 1.5 year long process, it was identified that a year-round household hazardous waste facility should be established. For a number of reasons, for the service, the fact that, one-day events weren't really providing the service that was needed out there, which, and we know increases, people hiding it in their garbage and end up in the landfills and chance of, contamination. So that even though we recognized and expected this to be an increase in the budget, it was approved through the solid waste management plan process to take on this additional cost to provide this service. So Did that answer the question?
Partially, but I'm just wondering, the alternative to this contract of $1 million is continuing events roughly $75,000 to $100,000 a year. So if we continued that routine, would we capture 75% of the problem or 30% of the problem? Is it really worth $1 million?
I mean, I can't give you the exact numbers because we haven't run the facility yet. We are quite confident though that the majority of people, when they call us and say, I have this in my garage, what do I do with it? And we tell them, well, you missed it last month, so hold it for another 11 months. Does that end up down the drain or in the garbage? So again, back to the solid waste management planning process and looking at other models or other regional districts, they've moved to this model for that reason, is that the events are not adequate to capture all that material, and we need to make it easier for people to get rid of.
Thank you, Director Blackwell and Director Sao.
Yeah, thank you to Mr. Vieira through the chair. This obviously is not for commercial. The only concern that I would have is actually to your last point, which is people storing this stuff up. Now, not everybody can make it to Kamloops. So is there going to be a quota per vehicle, per visitor? Can people bring it in for their neighbors? Have we figured that part out yet? Or are we waiting on that?
I'm going to turn that over to the manager of solid waste and recycling.
Oh, right. Yeah, so if the material is from a residential source, it can go to the facility. It's not anticipated at this time that there would be a limit on quantity. There will be some screening of the material to collect basic information, but you can drop it off on behalf of your neighbor.
Director Sao and then Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through chair to Jamie. It's sort of related to Director Granier's question. I know this is not related to commercial, but in light of perhaps this drastic change from a few days to year round, if there's excess capacity, is there any benefits we can spill over to the commercial aspects? Because a lot of new buildings now, especially with the renovations of older buildings, asbestos, perhaps that might help industry with their capacities issues if they have them.
Yeah, so through the chair, I think where should I start here? The facility will benefit commercial in the sense that the facility will accept materials from commercial entities. They just have to pay for it. It won't be covered by the taxpayer. So the idea is that the commercial entities, it's not that they don't have anywhere to take it, is that the taxpayer aren't paying for that. It should be the commercial entity paying the full cost of disposal.
Thank you, Director Stamer.
Thanks, Madam Chair, to Adriana. So further to this morning's conversation on the solid waste management committee, will there be opportunities when we looked at that list of what we're trying to do going forward with our renewable or recyclable products? Will there be ones that we may be having some difficulty with collecting? We'll be able to be offering that opportunity, like one of the ones was diesel. Is that something that we'll be able to help fill the gaps in?
Through the chair to Director Stamer, yes, absolutely. And the other good news is that the facility intends to sign up as an EPR collection depot. So they'll also take in-program materials, meaning it's more of a one-stop shop for all of that household hazardous waste, making it more convenient for residents.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments on this? No, seeing none then on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 8.1.5, Silga 2024 sponsorship. And see, Thank you.
Madam Chair, on this item as second vice president of SILGA, I'd like to recuse myself. And also, as I mentioned earlier, I have another engagement I have to be at. So thank you.
Chair Roden, I'd like to excuse myself too. I'm also on the board of SILGA.
Thank you. So we do have a recommendation. It has been moved by Director Ranta, seconded by Director Houghton. Thank you very much. Discussion. Director Rain?
Yeah, I just wanted to be certain that this would apply to other communities in the future. Obviously, all the communities are paying the portion of the support. This is for a Kamloops-based meeting, but I trust if Merit hosts in the future, we would continue that support.
Merit or Sun Peaks being the only other two communities within the TNRD that are probably, or municipalities that are big enough to support SILGA. So just wanting to ensure that if it is held in, say, Sun Peaks or Merit, that the TNRD would also be pursuing the sponsorship opportunity.
Through you to Chair Roden to Director Rain, it's certainly what my expectation would be, but we feel that would be appropriate.
I guess I'm really asking that the minutes record that this would be TNRD wide in the future.
And also just clarification on what that 6,750 gets in terms of the options for the speaking, the 10-minute presentation, because there is a choice. If we look at the agenda, there's a choice of places where we would be able to make that 10-minute presentation. And do we need to make a decision on that here?
I don't believe you need to, Chair Roden, but we certainly want to take advantage of that opportunity. If there is, I guess, advice or thoughts from the board, we'd gladly take that.
Thank you, Director Laird, and then Director Morris, Director Sow. Director Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I would like to make a motion that this is can be used at any of the SILGA meetings that happen within the regional district, Merit or Sun Peaks. So it's in the minutes. Thank you. If I can make that addition to that motion.
So you want that as a formal motion, or would it be enough that it was merely noted in the minutes of the meeting that that suggestion had been made?
I would like that as a motion, and then it's on.
Probably cleaner to have that as a separate motion then, rather than as part of this one, but I will defer to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are, as you say, two ways of doing this. It could either be as an amendment to the motion which has already been moved, that is to take the existing motion and then to say, and that the board commits to future sponsorship within the TNRD, or alternatively, you could wait until discovering whether or not the board votes in favor of the main motion and then make an additional motion afterwards that you expect this to be done in future. Either one of those would be valid ways of doing this.
I would just make an amendment.
Make an amendment?
Thank you.
All right, so we have an amendment, which it's been, Director Rain seconded it. So do we have any discussion on the amendment, which is to extend the sponsorship to any future SILGA events which are held anywhere within the TNRD region? Alternate Director Beppel on the amendment?
Just to be clear, the motion is for a specific amount of money, but in the future, well, costs go up. So I'm sure that the sponsorship costs would go up as well. And is the current motion, does that capture the essence of going forward, that regardless of the sponsorship costs, the TNRD would go for the gold level sponsorship? But it's not clear to me.
Thank you. Corporate Officer Lois?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to alternate Director Beppel. I believe at a staff level, we would always bring this back when the letter is sent because this arrives to us as correspondence. Essentially, the amendment as is, it would likely set an expectation that this equivalent level of sponsorship would likely be provided, but it would always be available to the board at the time to determine that they didn't want to for whatever reason, if say they felt it was a unnecessary financial imposition at that time.
Thank you, Director. So we do have the amendment on the floor. Any other comments or questions regarding the amendment? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. We are now back to discussing the amended motion. And next on my list is Director Morris.
Thank you, and through the chair, just a question, around an expense for a profile event, hosting our colleagues from a broad area. I think we just need to be cautious about setting maximums on those kinds of commitments to sponsorships. I just from a variety of perspectives. So I'll just leave it at that. I think we need to be cautious about that.
Thank you. Alternate Director Beppel. Okay, no, I've got you back on my list. Director Sal then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the opportunity to address delegates and swag table at the entrance, would municipal and EA members of TNRD, such as tourism committees, be able to provide swag to be at that table?
CEO Hildebrand.
Through you, Chair Roden, to Director Sao, I believe that would be set up through SILGA in order to, because I think every individual would need to apply or purchase a space or a table to participate.
Thank you. My question surrounding the 10-minute presentation time to delegation on the report regarding this. It says that there are 5 levels of sponsorship. The gold level sponsor entitles us to the following: a 10-minute presentation time to the entire delegation. At the top of the next page, there are 3 separate opportunities to make that 10-minute presentation at the welcome reception, the banquet, and the Thursday morning breakfast roundtable. We get to pick one of them. We do not get all 3. I understand the banquet has already been spoken for by someone else, which leaves us, at least as of the last time I discussed this, with an opportunity to speak at either the welcome reception or the Thursday morning breakfast roundtable session. I don't know if we need to make a motion, but I would suggest we go for the welcome reception, not the breakfast, which is traditionally not as well attended, shall we say? All right. Thank you. So do we need to make a motion on this, Mr. Corporate Officer, or is it enough that we take a straw poll and decide that we would prefer to say our thing at the welcome reception?
I think a straw poll is more than adequate on this. Sure.
Anyone who thinks we should take the breakfast, this is your opportunity to show us that you're an early riser. All right, so then suggest that we ask to speak at the welcome reception then.
Sure, I have the motion, I think.
Whoops, we still do have the motion on the floor now, the amended motion, which is to approve the gold sponsorship for SILGA, to use our 10 minutes to speak to delegates at the welcome reception, and to afford a similar opportunity should SILGA happen at any other TNRD location at some point in the future. All right, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. See you all in Kamloops. Oh, hang on, we're already here. We move on to 8.1.6 Regional Grants and Sponsorship Policy Amendment. We do have a recommendation. Moved by Director Thorpe, thank you. Seconded by Director Newstader. Discussion. Gentlemen, we are on to the Regional Grants and Sponsorships. Alternate Director Beppel.
Thanks. I was just looking under the policy general provisions. The first item is grants will not be provided to businesses, for-profit entities, individuals, or religious organizations. I just wanted some clarity on what a religious organization was. For instance, St. Vincent de Paul, which is here in Kamloops, would be an example. On their website. They say they're an international organization in the Catholic Church. So to me, that is squarely positioning themselves as a religious organization, perhaps, I'm not sure. Or the Good Samaritan Society, which is not currently in our area, but is in Salmon Arm. They provide housing for seniors, and it's a faith-based, not-for-profit. So what do you mean by religious organizations? Can it be, for instance, with the St. Vincent de Paul, an organization which provides meals and other services to people, or Good Shepherd, Good Samaritan, which provides housing? What are you meaning by the term religious organization?
Thank you. Through Chair Roden to alternate Director Beppel. We're using the traditional, I guess, meaning of religion and how they are associated or registered through their society potentially. But I'm going to let our grants coordinator, Ms. McMillan, just speak to that.
I agree exactly with what Scott said. So it would be more, or sorry, Mr. Hildebrandt, it would be more along the lines if a Catholic church came and asked us to replace or for funding for some sort of grant program, we wouldn't be able to do that, but it would maybe be a case by case basis. If it was something like a Good Samaritan's Act, or group, which originally was faith-based, we would definitely have to look at that. That wasn't a question that's come up before.
Okay, so I guess that if there is some latitude, then there just are organizations which clearly identify themselves as religious organizations that are not maybe house of worship, and maybe it's not an issue, but I'm just concerned about that terminology.
If I may, Chair, add to this, I did just want to note that there is, for example, provisions in the community charter about statutory tax exemptions, which are provided explicitly to buildings used by for purposes of worship by religious organizations. And I was just actually checking while the question was being asked, because I didn't think this was the case. And indeed, neither public worship nor religious organizations are defined in the legislation, in that it's simply an expectation that you know it when you see it, rather. And so I think in this case, when the way it's worded, where we say that grants will not be provided to religious organizations, we likely mean it in the sense of organizations that are actively religious, rather than ones which may be tangentially affiliated with a religious organization but perform generally public purposes. It's the kind of thing where a lot of the time there isn't very good statutory definitions of language that we use related to religion, belief, and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Director Stamer. Alternate Director Bevel, if you have a supplementary.
Well, I'm not convinced with your explanation, but if you're okay, because I think both of the examples I gave are religious organizations. They've defined them on their own websites as such. But if you feel that it's clear enough in terms of this policy, then that it goes towards people in terms of a house of worship, then we can leave it.
And sorry, before Director Stamer, I had Director Getz, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, we do this in our community on permissive tax exemption. We have Samaritan's Purse that has a place downtown. They are considered a religious organization, but because they are not in tax permissive, we don't give them a tax break. We also have several other groups that do work for their churches, but we don't give them a break because they're not on the church property. So I think that's one way that we would go if it was in my community, is on the permissive tax exemptions.
Thank you. Director Stamer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just to refer back to Director Getz, in Barrier, we also have relief to other organizations other than faith. So I don't know if we don't want to get into that because, I mean, for example, we give tax exemption for the senior society. We give a tax exemption for the curling rink. So let's not even, I didn't want to talk about that, but the one line that I'm not in favor of is the one that says preference will be given to those events or initiatives that have not received assistance from member municipalities. Because I don't really know if that's fair, because number one, it doesn't specify what that amount is. Could be a check for $50. And the second thing is, out in the aerial directors, I mean, you could give them a check for $500, but again, that should be part of the budget that is being submitted that we look at. So when we look at the revenue lines from those organizations, we should be able to pick that up. I don't necessarily think that we should be penalizing a municipality group from being able to receive monies from the TNRD when our taxpayers pay taxes just like everybody else. But because they might have received money from the municipality, we're not going to give them preference on that grant. I don't believe that's fair.
If I may, just to speak to that as part of a group that has received funding from the Village of Ashcroft, I think that it's more a case of an organization that receives assistance from a municipality. There are many groups within the TNRD that don't have the option of going to a municipality because they don't have one to ask necessarily. The TNRD is all they have. Especially this year with the $10,000 being a hard cap, we have no more money to find under the seat cushions of the TNRD if we get a big influx of requests for grants as we did in the spring of this year. The situation will ease somewhat next year when the increased limits go into effect. But I would rather be able to leave, say, that $10,000 for groups in the electoral areas who have not previously been able to avail themselves of funding from municipalities, rather than let someone who has been able to get something, say, from the Village of Ashcroft also go to the TNRD and try and get money from them at the expense of an EA group, a group in the EA that can't go to the Village of Ashcroft. So I saw Director Newstater and then Director Stamer.
Thank you, Chair. Just to acknowledge to that point, I think it's important that we look at the intention of that particular clause as well, which is to ensure that there is accessibility to those funds, and then also process on the back end of that we will be able to visit that as applications come in and the committee vets them, and they will understand the funding streams that are available for those various groups. So I don't have concerns based on those merits about that particular line, with the understanding that's implicit that it's for groups who don't regularly have access to funding. But again, with the oversight in the process, we'll know that as we look through applications and vet them for allocations as well.
Thank you. Director Stamer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, I totally agree with what Director Newstater had said. And just as you mentioned, I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying about the $10,000, what we have left for cap. What I'm saying is that I just don't like the wording when it says preference, because I think we all know that we're going to be trying to spread it around equitably throughout the TNRD. And yes, there's going to be members of our communities in particularly electoral areas that do not necessarily have the opportunity to petition their local municipalities. But I can tell you for the District of Barrier has provided grants in the past outside of our municipal boundaries, because those organizations that have petitioned it to us serve the greater area, not just particularly on the municipal boundaries themselves. So I just wanted to clear that up. Thank you.
Director Newstater and then Director Sao.
Through the chair again, would consideration be a more comfortable word perhaps as we look at that? And that again clarifies intention, that we're not going to prioritize it automatically, but that's something that should be considered as applications are examined.
I would go along with that. I think consideration is a better word than preference.
So are we able to make that a minor modification, substitute the word consideration for preference?
Yes, not a problem.
Thank you very much. And any Director Sao?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just more of a comment to assuage Director Stamer's fears, in electoral areas. Just speaking for myself, when I used the discretionary grants, as a matter of fact, this past year, I believe majority of my discretionary grant actually gone to organizations who are based in the municipality, you know, Clearwater Humane Society, Wellspray Search and Rescue, the Clearwater Soccer. So actually EAs, again, sorry, speaking for myself, I have actually a lack of organization who can receive money from me. So I hope that would never become the case where that, you know, we're favoring, you know, yes, municipal members are members, so there shouldn't be any favoritism.
Thank you, Director Rain.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Director Bethel's comment. I mean, I think we need to define this slightly better, and I was thinking about it's not available to religious organizations unless the activity is a public activity without any preference to religious membership. Because there are church organizations who provide social services to the public in general, and there's no requirement to be a member of that faith to make yourself or to have those services available to the public at large. Just a thought.
Would you be able to read that wording again, Director Rain?
Unless the activity is a public activity without any preference to religious membership.
Mr. Corporate Officer, are we able to make that modification, or does that require a motion?
Chair, so Mr. Hildebrand, for example, was able to answer very quickly yes to the last one because that was just such a small tweak. Essentially, in your procedure bylaw, it references how a friendly amendment may be made to a motion under debate if there is agreement. It is only an enhancement to or clarification of the original motion. So, for example, swapping out preference to consideration, that's very clearly falls into that category. I would say it is up to your judgment as chair as to whether this is a small thing that is enhancing or clarifying the original, and that can just be done as we acknowledge this has happened, or if you want to do a full-blown move second amendment, vote on, etc.
Well, let's just look around the room and see, would everyone be happy with wording suggested by Director Rain regarding the definition of religion, or would you prefer that we have a more formal motion? Is everyone all right with what Director Rain suggested? Lots of nods. All right, we will not go the formal route then. Thank you, Director Rain, for that elegant solution. Do we have any more questions or comments regarding the not amended for a second time motion? Seeing none then on the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. We go on to item 9.1, Policy Review Committee. And before we go on to the recommendation, Policy Committee Chair Bass would like to say a few words. She's going to look at me in surprise now.
I do.
Say, really? Yeah, I do. Yes, exactly.
Oh, that was not my understanding. What words are you expecting from me? I'm quite serious here. I was just gonna move. Well, then all right, then the wisdom here would be for me to move the recommendation and for us to vote on it and approve it. Because, all right, we're talking symbols here. And but symbols are important. And I think this is an important thing for us to deal with and just make a decision on it and put it and show that we care. That's all. Oh, is that what you want to hear from me?
That sounds good. And yes, and who seconded that? Director O'Reilly, thank you very much. Discussion. Director Blackwell, Director Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going through the eligible reasons for lowering the flag to half mast, are there, I'm going to just put this in the form of a question because I don't want to open a large debate, but it probably will. Are there other regional districts or entities that would lower to half mast in the event of the death of a local First Nations cookie or chief? Because I know Clearwater would.
Chair Roden, I could provide a perspective. I certainly would agree with that. And that's something that, in my opinion, I would do as an organization. Of course, that's the board's decision, but maybe Corbin has some further information in his research.
Thank you, CEO Hildebrand. I don't, and I haven't come across that when we were looking to other regional districts for perspective in terms of updating our flag protocol and policy. But we can certainly take that into advisement and certainly because there is the section that on the death of a person whom the board wishes to bestow this honor. I think that leaves that open enough that if the board did wish to do that they could. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Getz.
Just wanted to say, I thank you to the Policy Review Committee for bringing this up because we've had some flag issues in our community. So I actually have stolen this to use it and we'll watch where it's going to go because we have had some issues on Truth and Reconciliation Day. We did have the orange flag at half mast as well as the Canadian flag. So Merritt would be more than happy to flag at half staff for a recognized it could be our chief. It would not be a problem. I think it would be the appropriate measure. I don't think there would be an issue with it. And I'll bring that up at council. Thank you.
Thank you, Alternate Director Beppel.
Thanks. Section 4.3, it talks about when the flag would be raised again. And well, first of all, most of us don't have funerals anymore. But I think it should simply say it's flown half mast until the sunset on the day of the funeral or at the discretion of the TNRD board chair, period. Because the memorial may well be a month after the person has died. We aren't having funerals 2 or 3 days after a death anymore. So it doesn't seem to work with what actually is happening in terms of our ceremonies. I would suggest that we simply remove when there is not a funeral planned and just say, or at the discretion of the TNRD board chair, period.
Yeah, good. Everyone good with that? Yes. Yep. All right, thank you. That seems fairly minor. Any other questions or comments regarding the flag policy? Director Stamer?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, we spent a fair amount of time on this. Hopefully the board appreciates it, that we looked at a lot of different scenarios. And I think allowing the, as it says in I, as Corbin alluded to, allowing the board chair with some discretion and some liability. I mean, I can give you a really quick example where if it was the District of Barrier and there was a member of Simp First Nations, like Wilf Matthew, who was actually the first Indigenous president of a legion in Canada. He never was chief. He was never a counselor, but that would be significant. And if some First Nations we're going to ask for recognition on that point, of course we would respect that. So I would hope that we in this room would respect the same, right?
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you. Item 9.2, Utility Systems Committee. We do have a recommendation coming out of that. Director Houghton moves that. Thank you. Director Thorpe seconded. Is there any discussion? On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Correspondence action requested 10.1.1 Valemount and Area Recreation Development Association, VARDA, one of the nicer acronyms in our area, I think. And we are looking for an appointee, and I understand that Director Onslow would be amenable to having her name put forward. So I would like to move that we appoint Director Onslow as a TNRD representative on the Valemount and Area Recreation Development Association for 2023-4. Thank you. We all second it. That's unanimous. But I'm going to go with Vice Chair Smith here, just for the record.
Madam Chair.
Oh, Director Onslow, did you have something you wanted to bring up? Okay.
So discussion prior to it.
Yeah,
Just
we did have a
wondering whether or
discussion
not
prior, sorry.
That was a remuneration for.
I believe that Director Onslow would like to ask this question, and we do have an answer ready, I believe.
So this came up about remuneration for attending meetings on behalf of the TNRD. And I posed the question to Mr. Hildebrandt because I was unsure of what policies were around that. And so I would like to ask to be remunerated and for going to these meetings on behalf of the TNRD.
Because it's 180 kilometers from where you are to Valemount, correct?
It's 90 kilometers.
So 180 round trip.
Yeah, round
Okay.
trip. So, and the meals like meal is, it's usually an evening meal. And oftentimes I will attend that via Zoom, but I'm looking for compensation for attending the meetings, not necessarily just for mileage reimbursement.
Thank you. CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Director Onslow and I had this discussion, and this is the exact example when a formal request comes through and it's kind of outside where the board would need to make this decision, and expenses are certainly covered with the board's discretion. So I'd be in favor with this, and we'd make that adjustment internally and make sure that Director Onslow is compensated appropriately.
Thank you. Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair, and I certainly support Director Onslow being the representative here. But my issue about this request, there's two actually. The first is it's a non-voting, and so voting versus non-voting, we have this on airport board and other things. It raises a question for me. And then the other is that we've got a TNRD board member that is going to be, as part of their commitment from board members, involved in fundraising. And when I was first appointed to or elected to this position, I was faced with the same thing with an organization that it was assumed that I would be a director on it at the same time as contributing substantially to the financial well-being of that organization. So I would ask that the policy committee look at the two issues of voting and non-voting board members. If the person's going to be a board member, should they be voting or non-voting? Does that mean anything? And secondly, what does it mean in terms of the allegiance to the TNRD versus the board that they've just been appointed to? If they have a fiduciary responsibility to their TNRD, which we all have, then what is their limited fiduciary responsibility to the board on matters that involve the TNRD? And I think that that's something that our policy group could look at and discuss and come back with some recommendations. So I'd ask that that be considered as part of this well-meaning thing.
Thank you. Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things. I think if somebody is going to be traveling 100 kilometers each way to represent the TNRD, there should be a form of compensation. I do for that time. But when we look at fiduciary duty to one organization or another, we all have to make decisions when we're in conflict or not, and who we're representing. And to try and put that in policy, what's a direct conflict or not, is extremely difficult. And if we're worried about trying to wordsmith it to death, people that don't want to be in conflict, they're going to find a way to say they're not in conflict. And so to try and put that and document that down, what a conflict is for that person is difficult, as we all know. All of us are on the table. We always have to weigh things on a case-by-case basis and decide when we need to recuse ourselves from things. And I trust the members around this board to make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Alternate Director Beppel.
Thanks. In terms of being a board or not, I think, especially for EAs, there's an expectation of being part of community through either formal or informal community groups. And because your area is so large, there's also expectation that you will have to go to many different locations to do your job. I would be more concerned about whether, you know, if you deny this or when the director is going to this meeting, are they no longer doing it as a TNRD director? And if, for instance, they were in a motor vehicle accident, like who's covering it? Is there like workers' compensation? When do you define the work that you do in community, which is an expectation that you are going out and talking to people in different places? When is the expectation that you're going to be covered with workers' compensation if you were in an accident or something like that?
Conversation is taking a somewhat dark tone, but anyway. Does anyone have an answer to that? I'm assuming that if a TNRD director is traveling on to represent the TNRD, they would be covered by the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, but Ms. Ellison?
I'm not sure if I have a full answer, but I'll add more to the story is to remember that workers' compensation is a wage loss insurance, right? So if you're volunteering for a board, then that's a wage loss insurance. Or could the TNRD, you're not volunteering, but it would limit coverage up to your wage. So I don't know about full applicability, but I think that's an important piece we often forget is it's not overall insurance, it's for your wage loss.
Thank you. I have Directors Getz and then Newstater and Hamer Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation is as a TNRD representative. So it's fairly clear this is a TNRD representative. Could we possibly change the wording to TNRD liaison? Now, I liaison several committees in Merit. I'm non-voting. I listen, I take back what they'd like me to take back, but I have no skin in the game as a mayor or a councillor. I'm a liaison, which then covers the situation that I'm at that point in time. A representative, I think, is a different term, whereas possibly liaison might make that a little bit better. That way the TNRD is liaised and this person's not expected to pick between the two. Just my thought.
Thank you. We have Director Newstater and then Director Hamer Jackson.
Thank you, Chair, and Director Getz covered some of what I was going to say, but I also don't have a concern with representative. We serve in roles like this all the time as non-voting members of a board. An example is venture Kamloops that we serve on. Liaison is the terminology we use, but just a reminder to come back to the recommendation that we are looking at. I feel like we've gone down some rabbit trails, so hoping to stick with the recommendation that's specifically that we are appointing Director Onslow to this role, but I don't see any concerns with how it's written, what we're doing, or the role that we serve in it.
Thank you, Director Hamer Jackson.
Yeah, and I think whether you've got ICBC or private insurance, I think that you just got to let them know how much you're doing, what you're doing. You know, no different than any insurance policy. You know, if you're doing so much for business and that kind of thing, I think you'll be covered.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Director Morris?
Thank you, Chair Burton. Just a quick question. Is it worthy of us exploring this again, even at the EA committee? Because it may be, as we all get very engaged in all kinds of initiatives, do we need to re-explore this? So I'll just leave that out as a question, and the chair of the committee can see if we'd like to put it on, because I think we all have so many involvements at various levels of communities, and we no matter what, we're bringing our TNRD hat to the table, but we're also bringing a lot of other hats as well, usually. So that's just a suggestion for us to consider. Thank you.
Director Stamer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess there's a lot of things that we do that, I mean, that we don't get paid for. Just wanted to bring a point out that, you know, Valemont is not in the TNRD, but a lot of these activities encompass, you know, overlapping jurisdictions. And I think it's great that Director Onslow wants to be part of that process, because you know, where there's a lot of initiatives in the valley that we're partaking on, and we're not really looking at the boundaries. We're trying to work together. So that's great that she's, you know, taking the time to do it. And let's face it, it's really not covering the cost of her going up there and back.
Thank you. Going to call the question, which is that the board appoint Director Onslow as a TNR representative on Varda. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. All right, we move on to item 10.2.1. It is an item for information only, but of course, questions and comments are invited from anyone who has any. We'll all just watch Director Hall make his way unobtrusively out of the room. Any questions or comments on item 10.2.1? Seeing none, we move on to new business from members. Is there any new business, Director Laird?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a recommendation that the EA committee meeting have an opportunity to meet as directors to discuss remuneration and expenses. It could be possibly between November 1st and November 3rd. It's important for the EA directors to have this meeting. We haven't had that opportunity, and it's something that we need to do as a committee for the AE directors to address this issue.
Thank you. So you're making a motion that the EA directors have a special committee meeting of EA directors between November 1st and 3rd, preferably?
Yes.
All right. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Thank you, Director Graham. Discussion. Staff, I assume, will send out a list of possible dates and times within that time frame, and possibly a little bit either side just in case.
And
CEO Hildebrand?
Thank you, Chair. Roden, just looking at calendars, we have a lot of meetings already booked with budget and EA directors. So is there any flexibility on the dates?
we'd like to have it before the committee of the whole meeting that's coming up for a discussion.
Do you mean the budget meeting or the committee of the whole budget meeting?
Committee of the whole budget.
Okay, so prior to the 8th.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll find a solution that makes sense for everybody.
Can it be a Zoom meeting as well for any that can't attend in person?
We always have that availability.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't think so. Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to note that I went up to Prince George on the 30th of September to watch the changing of the commanding officer for the Rocky Mountain Rangers. And Amo Vecchio, he has now stepped down.
Once we do have a motion on the floor first. Sorry, I thought you wanted to speak to the motion. So we're just going to rewind and go back to the motion, which is that a staff schedule a date for an EA directors committee meeting to take place before November 8th. So on that motion, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Director O'Reilly.
Well, I think everyone knows for the most part what I was going to say, but watched the change in the commanding officer for the Rocky Mountain Rangers was Amo Vecchio. He was in that position for, I believe it was close to 6 years. He's served multiple tours throughout Europe and the world and the Middle East, and most recently throughout Europe as it relates to the war in Ukraine. And so it's a significant changing for the Rocky Mountain Rangers. And I would like to invite him to come and speak to the TNRD at some point as a delegation, just to hear about his time and thank him for his service to our region.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any new business to raise? Alternate Director Beppel and then Director Houghton.
Thanks. I just want to remind my colleagues that I'll be going to Ottawa from November 20th to 24th as part of what's called Advocacy Days, where we speak to MPs and senators. I want to thank CEO Hildebrand for providing some information, but they really want to hear the stories of local communities. And the biggest goal is to change the funding formula between the federal government and local governments. So for instance, Mr. Hildebrand said that the TNRD has applied for $11.5 million worth of grants, and we've only gotten 1.5 million. We're only batting at 10%. So if you have anything you want to share in terms of stories that might help, in terms of how we get money from the federal government, that would be great. And the other things that we'll be talking about is housing and infrastructure, which is related to money, climate, public safety, like the RCMP contract would be a big one. And anything specific that you think is difficult in terms of being a rural community, in terms of how you work with federal government. So thanks. I'm going November 20th, so if you have time to give me anything before that to share with the MPs, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Director Houghton.
I just wanted to bring you up to date, and you, CEO Hildebrand, I got a phone call yesterday because during the wildfires, as you all know, we got severely affected in Nutsford, and as we did in many other places, and the wildfire people were great to work with during the fires, but I was kind of critical of them that once the fires are over, you never see them again, especially when it comes to cleanup and all that stuff. But I did put in a claim at Claims of BC Wildfire Service, and not expecting to hear from anybody, but I got a phone call yesterday that a gentleman from Castlegar is making an appearance in Nutsford on the weekend and going to visit with us neighbors to go over the damages. So I know Director Stamer said, don't get your hopes up, Dougie, but I thought to make that aware to CEO Hildebrand. He's on the task force, and I'll fill you in after the meeting on how it goes and what they decide, but hopefully we get compensated for the damages that they made.
Thank you, Director Houghton. Good luck with the meeting. Any other new business? Seeing no hands, we move on to item 12, notice of motion. And before we get to the notice of motion, I'm going to ask our corporate officer to give us a 30-second Coles Notes version of explanation of notices of motion and where we are in the process.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to essentially the wording in the be it resolved that section, and just set expectations appropriately. And to make very clear that this, as a notice of motion, this is resolving that staff be directed to prepare a report. So if you do vote for this today, the only thing that will happen is that staff will prepare a report, which will come back to this board for further consideration. If and when, so if you instruct for that to happen, then the report will come back. And then when considering that, you might or might not, depending on your views, choose to instruct staff to bring forward bylaw alterations. And then if there are bylaw alterations required to the zoning bylaw, there will be public hearings required. So I just wanted to note that this is the beginning of a process, and that you are not taking any decisions today on the merits of the actual issue raised.
Thank you very much. So we do have the notice of motion. It was introduced at our meeting 2 weeks ago. We are now voting on the notice of motion itself, which, as the corporate officer has said, is directing staff to prepare a report to the board examining options for limiting the size of cabins in resort zones, including a comparison with regulations used by other rural regional districts.
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Director Onslow, thank you. This is not the time to debate the merits of the notice of motion, the size of cabins, et cetera. This is simply about directing staff to prepare a report. And do we have a timeline? I think possibly sometime early in the new year is when we might expect to see a report if it is recommended.
Thank you, Chair Roden. And talking to Mr. Kraus, he feels like sometime early in the new year, we will have that and allow us to do the research, talk to other regional districts, and provide the information.
Thank you. I have Director Stamer, Director Rain, Director Sow, Director O'Reilly.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just as a comment, my comment would be sooner rather than later. Again, there's been activity in the TNRD that is contrary to what we as a board have approved on development permits. I'm not making this up. And so to me, I think we don't want to, get the cart before the horse, but I know that staff is busy, but I think I would like to be able to be seeing a report very early in the new year so that we could actually act on this before the snow is gone. And the reason I'm saying that is because I believe there's been some things that have been happening that we have not been able to control. And if we wait too long in the spring, there's a lot of other things that could occur after the fact. So I'm just trying to make it to the effect that expediency is important in this situation, and I don't think we should be dragging our feet. Thank you.
I think CEO Hildebrand will clarify that staff would not be dragging their feet. It's just the amount of time that's going to take to prepare a report of this size. CEO Hildebrand?
Just for clarity, I think February would make sense. We could probably have it done and brought back for a February meeting.
Thank you. Next up, Director Rain.
I just wanted to add, Sun Peaks, we go through this size because people want to maximize everything. Related to size is occupancy. So I trust that in the report we'll deal with physical size and occupancy.
Thank you. Director Sal.
Actually, sorry, Madam Chair, Director Staber addressed my question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions, I guess. I mean, obviously, I'm not really in the rural areas or in some of the areas that cabins are being built. But has this been a significant problem in the sense that we're asking staff to do a report, and where my head's going is that I know that everything that we make a notice of motion for to add something onto their desk is something else is coming off based on the prioritization that we kind of have done as a strategic plan. So that's just sort of where I'm wondering, I don't know where that's coming from, or how big of the issue it is. And then another question through to staff, just as it referenced specifically on Marnie's Bay in a subject line, and I don't really know much about that. So thank you.
CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. In talking to Mr. Kraus, he said he would like to do the due diligence in pulling the information together if the board asks this report to move forward. We did feel like February or so would make sense from a timing standpoint. His comment was, from his perspective, that it wasn't a pressing problem that he is hearing about here in the office, but certainly would leave it to the board to decide.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Alternate Director Bepple.
Thanks. At least from what I'm hearing, the idea is that we draft the bylaw regardless of whether we support this premise, and then debate it after the bylaw is no. So if we don't support the premise, we are not gonna draft the bylaw.
If we're simply asking staff to prepare a report, which will come back to us ideally in February, when we have the report, we will read it if we have questions or comments. And at that time is when we would decide yes or no on whether we need bylaw changes. That is not until after we get the report. We could read the report and the vote could be no, everything is fine. We don't need to make any bylaw changes.
Yeah. I guess that the question is whether the report should even be drafted. Like, is there enough information now to say that there isn't a compelling reason to change how things are? And my understanding is that the two concerns is lack of access to the lake through what is private property. So the idea that public should have access through private property to a lake, which is a bit problematic because of a form of public access. And then the other is that the size of cabins, which would have been adequate 10, 20, 50 years ago, that we should continue with that size of cabin, as opposed to what maybe people want, which is a larger structure. So I'm not sure that we should go further based on the premise of the motion, but maybe Mr. Director Stamer can sort of explain more why we should be supporting trying to keep public access through private property, whereas maybe we should actually be creating parks for public access, and why we should keep cabins the size that they were in the 1960s, as opposed to perhaps a little bit bigger.
Okay, Director Stamer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Really, that's a good question, Director Beppo, but that's not really what the point is. The point is that if there's a particular use that we're using in our lakeshore bylaw on what is permitted uses in that zone, and a person purchases that property with that in mind, and then they decide to completely change what that development is, regardless of whether there's public access or not, is the main question. And if somebody turns around again and purchases a piece of property like that, that is specifically commercial use, which has been used for the public, whether they're using campers or tents or cabins or whatever it is, and they purchase that property, and then the next thing you know, they build a half a dozen big houses on it. That is circumventing our bylaws. That is circumventing the zoning. They did not go to a public hearing and change it. They did not get the public support on changing it. They just arbitrarily changed it, and there's nothing that we can do about it. That's my point. And again, if somebody did purchase a piece of property like that, I think I used the example on the radio, and somebody says, you know, we've been continuing this has been used as a campground for the last 30 years. Well, we can't economically continue to do that. The prices are too high. We're going to have to charge $150 a night for somebody to tent. But what we do have is a proposal that the board can look at. We'd like to split the property in two. This side here, we'd actually like to densify and put twice as many units on this side. And we'd like to put 6 or 8 homes on this side to help pay for the whole thing. What do you think as a board? Well, we can't even have that proposal right now because we have no way of controlling it. They could turn around and put 6 houses on this side and then turn around 2 years later and change their mind and put 6 houses on that side. And there's no way that we can actually enforce it. That's the problem. That's what was explained to me by Mr. Kraus. So that's just an example. And he would bring back what other regional districts are doing with regional growth in their areas. And we can look at it specifically if it's something that we should be upgrading and updating, because I think we should. And then as a board, we can decide what we want to do. Do we want to limit access? Do we want to limit size? Or no, these guys are willing to invest on this piece of property and they want to put 5 or 6 homes on it. Go ahead. But that's a board decision. That shouldn't be just up to them.
Thank you. Just a reminder that this is not a time for debate. This is just a time for answering questions at this stage. So just bear that in mind. I have Directors Hamer Jackson and Sow on my list, and Thorpe. Hamer Jackson, Director Hamer Jackson, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just think that we need to respect the director or the person putting the motion forward, because it's probably for good reason.
Thank you. I have Directors Sow and Directors Thorpe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I echo Director Hamer Jackson. Yes, I do support this. However, addressing Director Beppo's point, coming from the public side who may not have as much background, when I look at it, as you know, a lot of electoral area constituents are concerned that TNRD is always restricting, are infringing on our rights. And I want to be very careful in the report that we make sure that we describe these worst case scenarios, why we're doing this. We're not doing this just to, whenever I see restriction, that's a very sensitive word that we, in the report, that we stress the reasons why. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Thorpe.
Okay, I'm just looking for a little bit of clarification. So 2 questions. One, approximately how many staff hours is this going to take, and were you going to have to sideline to do this? Because we've got natural disasters, we've got reconciliation, we've got a lot of other things that we're trying to also juggle at the same time. So that's number 1. Number 2, are we just looking at this one specific property along, I think it's Adams Lake, or is this something that is problematic right across the regional district? In other words, are we just dealing with one tiny little spot, or is this affecting everything in the regional district? Those are the two questions. Thanks.
CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. We feel that the presentation or the report that's being requested is doable. We don't feel like it's going to take a significant amount of time, but it'll certainly get in the way of other things because we need to stop something to do this, but we don't think it's going to be a big issue. And that's why we're saying February would work. I've talked to Mr. Kraus. He feels like he can get the research and the information from other regional districts and provide a recommendation, and the data being requested. Sorry, the second question, Director. Or was I?
Second question is this specific to Adams Lake, or
Sorry.
do we as a board feel that this is a problem all the way across the TNRD? So were you looking at it as a whole region or just one isolated incident?
Yeah, the notice of motion, the request would be for the entire region. That's what the notice of motion he's asking us to review our policy for the
But what
entire
I'm
region.
asking, maybe I'm not being clear, and I apologize, is do we know of other incidents, or are we just looking at one specific incident that has caused this report that we're looking at? Or is this all the other lakes are having this issue?
Yeah, well, thank you for that clarification. In talking to Mr. Kraus, he said it hadn't hit his desk. It hadn't been a concern from his perspective.
Thank you. Any other questions? Director Stamer will let you have the last word.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is not a specific incident. I'm not suggesting that it's got anything to do with Marnie's Bay or anywhere else, because there's been developments that have happened over the past before this board sitting. Chair Ranta knows of other ones that have been in the TNRD where the developer has said one thing and then done another. And he's smiling. So I'm guessing that's a nod. And so this isn't something new. This has happened in the past. My concern is that if we don't at least look at what we're doing and what other regional districts are doing, don't be surprised if all of a sudden we get a whole bunch of people angry with us saying, why did you let them do this? And we're going to say, well, we never had any public hearings. We haven't done any change to the zoning, but because we don't have any way of enforcing our bylaws, they can pretty much do what they want. That's all I'm saying, is review what we can do, review of what we've got, and review of where we're going with this, so that if a developer comes along and says, hey, this place is for sale, what can I actually do with this? Say, well, under the current zoning, you can do this. If there's an additional zoning and you have a different plan, you can do that. But right now, we really have a lot of gray area on what we can and can't do. And right now, from what Mr. Kraus told me, there's not a whole lot we can do to stop them to do what they want.
Thank you. So I'm going to call the question on the notice of motion, which is, be it resolved that staff be directed to prepare a report to the board examining options for limiting the size of cabins in resort zones, including a comparison with regulations used by other rural regional districts. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Opposed, if any? That is carried. Question period. Are there any questions from members of the public? We will all look fixedly at my husband, who's the only person in the gallery. And I've told him he is not to ask any questions.
I was pretty sure I saw a hand up there.
I think you
He can ask them on the long drive back to Ashcroft. We have wonderful conversations. All right, we move into closed meeting. So I would like to make a motion that we take this into closed for under Community Charter Section 90.1E, acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements, and 90.1C, labor and staff relations, seconded by Director Stamer. Thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, carried. We are adjourned for 5 minutes.